Hey guys, what's up? It's Dante and welcome back to another video on my channel. Guys, I'm really excited to be coming at you with another video. I know, super cringy intro, but I kind of want to work on that. I really hate my intro, but you know what? That's not what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Brandon Teena. Now, this case was super hard to research just because the subject matter was super, I don't want to say traumatizing or triggering, but genuinely, this was probably the saddest case I've had to research up to this point. I know my last case that I just did, which was also a hate crime, was super hard as well, but this one specifically, for some reason, reading it was just genuinely one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. I think also in part because I did actually watch a documentary called The Brandon Teena story or documentary, which is on Prime Video, which I definitely recommend that you watch if you are more interested in this. It's about 50 minutes and it's where a lot of the information and details come from in this story, but I think watching it and hearing people talk about him and seeing pictures of him, it just really humanized him in a different way that I think a story like what I say on YouTube could ever do. So I definitely think you should check it out. I think it is important if you want to fully understand the story. So I definitely recommend that. The second thing I want to say is actually, guys, this is my first case request ever that I've done and I'm super excited. Somebody in the comments down below commented, I'm going to try to find the comment specifically, but they recommended this case and that's why I decided to do it. And guys, I think today is going to be my longest video by a long shot. I'm looking at the notes that I took and it is double the length of my other one. So guys, get some popcorn, get a drink, because you're going to be sitting here for a while. Take a little bathroom break because this is going to be a long story and I'm going to try to get as many clips in here as I can because I want to give you guys the full effect of this story, the one that I got when I was researching it and watching the documentary. So without further ado, before I start, guys, this is not related to the case at all. I just wanted to get it in super quickly. I have a Redbubble store that I'm launching. I know, but guys, it's really fun for me to kind of create little stickers and designs, and I have it all over my computer, as you can see. So it's just really fun for me to make them. So I've kind of just been doing that in my free time during quarantine, and I'm just gonna link that down below. You guys absolutely do not have to buy anything. Literally, I don't really care. I just thought I would promote it because if you guys like stickers like me, you might find something down there that you think is cute and quirky, so you might be like, oh, I want to pick that up. So if you like that, go check down below, but obviously no pressure. I just wanted to plug it before I started this case. So without further ado, let's get into the case of Brandon Teena, or Teena. I'm gonna say Teena, but in the documentary they said Teena and Teena. They used a lot of different names, and we're gonna get into that a little later in the case, why they did that, but it was a little confusing to research because of that, but I'm gonna go with Brandon Teena as the name. But I know for the fact the first name was Brandon, so that's all that really matters. Brandon Teena was born on December 12th of 1972 in Lincoln, Nebraska. His mother, Joanne Brandon, raised him alone as his father had died when Brandon was still in her womb. So she was still pregnant with him and the father sadly passed away. In Brandon's childhood, he has come out and said that when he was younger, he and his sister Tammy were actually sexually abused by their uncle. In 1991, so when he was around 19 or 18, he decided to go get some help in counseling because he wanted to try to move past this. So that's kind of how we know that this happened in his childhood. So during Brandon's adolescence, so I'm assuming right around the time of puberty, Brandon started to identify and dress a lot like a male. And so he started asking people to refer to him as male, and he actually switched his name from his original birth name, which I'm not going to go into because it doesn't really matter, to Brandon. So I'm going to refer to him as Brandon because that's who he was. However, when Brandon told his mother that he wanted to go by he, him pronouns, the mom completely rejected this as she was a Christian. So, according to her religion, she kind of viewed it as wrong and immoral. So she continued to use she, her pronouns, and actually in the documentary, which was made after Brandon's death, she continues to use she, her pronouns to talk about her son. After graduating from high school, Brandon was motivated to enter the army, and so he actually tried to apply for the army and military. However, he was unable to actually join the military because when he took the written exam, he actually didn't end up failing it because he wrote male in his gender bubble, and they were like, well, that's not what your government-issued documents say, so we can't accept you. So sadly, he was unable to go into the army and military, which is so sad because if he had just been able to do that, I really think Brandon would still be alive right now. Which is really sad to think about. In January of 1992, Brandon wanted to get more insight onto his gender identity, and so he decided to go to a psychiatrist, and he took a test at the psychiatrist's office to try to figure out what was going on with him internally and mentally. And the psychiatric evaluation revealed that he was going through a sexual identity crisis. So when Brandon was younger, he struggled a lot with, trying to find out his gender identity. I'm sure that took a big toll out of him, just mentally, just really being confused all the time about what his gender was and not really understanding and, trying to have to constantly explain himself to other people who wouldn't understand him and just going through a lot of persecution based on his gender identity. However, this did not stop him from being just a genuinely amazing and kind person. People that knew him described him as a super considerate and kind person. And in the documentary that I watched, there's a lot of interviews with Brandon's old girlfriend, and a lot of them described him as being really nice and just overall really understanding of women, and a lot of people said that this was because, you know, when he was younger, he was originally born a female, and so he understood what girls wanted because he had lived through that life for a little bit, you know, of his life. Girls felt like he really, really understood them, and so he would buy them things like roses, perfume, and just things that would make them feel really special because he knew that that would make them feel really good about themselves. And I just want to emphasize, like, women really liked him, and like a lot of women were really into him, and like honestly, I don't blame them. And a little side note, like if you guys look at the pictures, like he's a very attractive young man. Like, I don't blame them for, you know, being into that. Not everything was perfect when it came to dating, as a lot of women, you know, were completely okay with it because Brandon didn't actually tell a lot of people that he was transgender, which is kind of a controversial thing nowadays. However, then I think it was more for safety, as if he had told people what he was, they might have completely reacted in a negative way and, you know, tried to harm him. And so when people did find out what he was, because, you know, there were whispers, these are small towns, people would call him the F slur, the D slur, which is used towards, derogatory towards lesbians. And a lot of people would call him a lesbian, which really upset him because he was a transgender male. He was a straight male. And so it was hard for him that people wouldn't accept him for that and, you know, make fun of him and call him a lesbian when he just knew that at heart that's not what he was. So in 1993, he ended up moving to a small city called Falls City, Nebraska, as he was developing a criminal record in his hometown and he just wanted to move past that. He just kind of wanted a fresh start in a new city, and so this is why he decided to move here from his old city. When he was there, he actually met a woman named Lana Tisdale, who seemed really, really nice in the documentary. You know, she seems like a kind person. He had a really big thing for her and he really liked her, and so he eventually asked her out and they started dating, and eventually they became boyfriend and girlfriend. So a couple months into them dating, Brandon had actually gotten in trouble with the law, and so he was arrested. And I think because he had had a criminal record in the past, they had to hold him in like the jail. And so when he was in the jail, they'd actually housed him with the other female prisoners. And when Lana had gone to bail him out, because that's what Lana did, she was like, oh my god, you're in jail, like I'll come get you. And when she went to go get Brandon out of jail, she went to the police and she was like, where is he? And they were like, oh, he's in the women's, you know, section. And she was like, well, why is that? And that's when she learned that Brandon had been born female at birth. So on the way home, Brandon tried to explain this to Lana, saying that he was a hermaphrodite, and actually he said that he was also trying to get a sex change operation to deal with this, and that he would eventually have a penis instead of what he had. So it's kind of the introduction of Brandon and who Brandon was, so a little backstory on him, and this takes us directly into what happened to Brandon that made this case so important and widespread and just a huge story. So Lana and Brandon had decided to attend this party at one of their friends' houses, and at this party, two men, Tom Nyson and John Lauder, approached Brandon and demanded that he revealed what his gender was, because they had heard rumors, for example, at the police station, that he was housed in the girls' unit, and they wanted to know, and there was just a lot of people talking and trying to figure out what Brandon was, because I guess, you know, at the time there really wasn't that many transgender people, and so in a small town like this, they didn't really know, you know, what transgender meant. So people were really, really curious. And so, you know, a lot of people talked about this. And so these two men decided that they were going to physically get this answer out of Brandon. When they approached him, he refused to answer, because why should he have to answer? This is not the place. It's a party. Like, they have no right to go up to him and demand that he answer such personal and vulnerable questions. In front of Lana, his girlfriend, they pulled down Brandon's pants and underwear to reveal his genitalia. And at first, Lana did not want to look because she said, this is disgusting and rude. Why are you pantsing him in front of everyone at the party? However, the two men forced her to look, and when she did see that Brandon still had female genitalia. She, you know, looked, and then they finally released Brandon and let him pull back all of his clothes, put them all back on, and he went with Lana, and they were talking. She seemed okay with this. She said, I'm so sorry this happened, like, this is not right, but I don't really care. So Lana was okay with this at this time, I believe, and they actually did end up staying at the party for a little bit longer, and then Lana decided that she actually wanted to leave the party because she just didn't want to be there anymore. She asked Brandon if he wanted to go with her, and he said, no, I'll stay here for a little bit longer, like, I think I'll be okay with these two guys. The ones who had just pantsed him. So for me, when I was reading this, I was like, why would you stay with these people? That doesn't make sense. They're so violent towards you, but I think he was just trying to be like the strong man that he viewed himself as, and so he wanted to prove that Lana, like, oh, I'm not afraid of these guys, like, I can still stay in here, like, don't worry about it. But so Lana did end up leaving Brandon alone with these two guys at the party. And so John and Tom, a couple minutes after Lana had left, told Brandon that they wanted to talk to him in the bathroom. And so Brandon went with them, you know, a little hesitant, because he was probably like, what do they want with me? Like, they just pantsed me in front of everyone, like, what could they possibly want from me now? And so when they went into the bathroom, John held the door shut, and Tom started to punch Brandon, and he punched him and he pushed him down, and he hit his head on the bathroom tub. While he was knocked over, Tom decided to continue to kick Brandon while he was already down on the floor in the ribs. To continue this assault, the man then dragged Brandon out into one of their cars and they drove him to a secluded parking lot. And this is when Brandon knew that something horrible was going to happen, because why would you take someone to a secluded parking lot? Like, why would you drag someone out of a house into your car to bring them somewhere else? So he was very, very nervous at this point in time because he didn't know what they were going to do to him. And so he started begging with them and pleading with them to please just let him go, and he wouldn't say anything to the police, and he just wanted to be out of the situation. However, the two men did not let him go. When they finally stopped the car in the parking lot, Tom then turned around and threatened Brandon by saying, "We could do this the easy way, or I could beat the shit out of you." And then Tom proceeded to go in the back seat and rape Brandon. Tom then turned to his friend John and asked if he wanted a chance with Brandon, and he said yes. Tom went to the front and John came around back and tried to continue to rape Brandon as well. However, I don't think he was able to. He claims that he was intoxicated, and he claims that, you know, he just wasn't able to get it up in the moment. I think he said he was thinking about his fiance, so there's a lot going on in his head. I think also the fact that you were raping a poor, like, defenseless person, like, the whole thing gets me so frustrated. But he basically said he wasn't able to get it up, and he tried to rape, but he wasn't able to. But he did eventually finish. Somehow he was able to finish. And so after John was done raping Brandon, Tom had pulled Brandon out of the car and then kneed him down and continued to assault him while he was, after the rape had already happened and after they'd already assaulted him originally, just to continue to prove that they could beat him and, you know, assault him and just continue to prove that they were just... In the video, I said that when I was filming, I wasn't really sure why they would do something like this to Brandon, who was only ever nice to them and never did anything to them. And for them to have such rage, really just for no reason, I didn't really understand why. I mean, I still don't. I will still never understand why somebody would ever do that to another human being. But I think that the reason of what they were trying to prove was their masculinity. I just think, you know, for them it was so crazy that someone could want to be a man. I think they felt like almost offended, I guess, maybe, that Brandon was trying to impersonate them. So in order to teach him a lesson, they decided to be as brutal as they could to demasculinize him. I think the only way that they knew they could, and that was by raping him in his female genitalia, which I think they knew would trigger and traumatize him for the rest of his life. After this, they had actually driven Brandon back to the party, and Brandon had actually escaped out of one of the back doors, and he had gone to his girlfriend Lana's house. When Brandon got to Lana's house, she had described him as being in horrible condition and said he had a busted open lip, no shoes on, and he was missing his outer shirt, because usually he wore like a shirt like this and then a shirt on top of that, but he was missing the outer shirt, so he just came completely disheveled and beat up looking. He explained the entire situation to him and the mother, Lana's mother, and Lana's mother was like, oh my god, if somebody, like, no one deserves to be assaulted, no one deserves to be, because he actually didn't tell them about the sexual assault at that point, just the actual assault. And so the mother said, like, you need to go to the police, and Lana was like, you also, like, you should go report this, like, it's not okay that they did this to you. Originally, Brandon did not want to go to the police, however, except Lana and the mother kept convincing him, like, maybe you should go, like, this is serious, no one deserves what happened, you should report this. And so he did end up going to the police and reporting this whole situation. So actually, just a little note here, the entire situation that I just read is actually from Brandon's perspective from the police interview, so I want to just make that clear. So when Brandon had gone into the interview, he explained the entire situation to the police, so that's where all of basically what I just said before this was what he said in the interview. So basically, when I was watching the documentary on Prime Video, they included clips from the actual recording of when Brandon went in to talk to the police officer. So you actually heard what he was saying. So like I mentioned, the information that I just mentioned above from the sexual assault came off from Brandon. So that was the first part of the interview. However, in later parts of the interview, the police officer started asking Brandon questions that were completely inappropriate. And a lot of them had to do with Brandon's transgenderism. Okay, so basically I decided to include some clips here, like I said before, and these clips, the ones that I'm going to include right now, basically show the sheriff asking Brandon questions that seemed a little personal and invasive and didn't seem to have that much to do with the case at all, in my opinion. Maybe at parts you can see like, oh, I can see how you could relate that, but there are times where the sheriff completely stepped the line, and I feel like this is a part that's talked about a lot in this case, is the sheriff and the police department in general completely overstepping their boundaries and asking Brandon questions that literally had nothing to do with the crime that they were investigating. And so a lot of people said that this was a complete overstep of their power and abuse of power from the police department.
What do you have in your underpants? Nothing in your underpants?
What are you talking about earlier, that sock? No, he put me in, didn't
You didn't have a sock. Do you run around once in a while with a sock in your pants to make you look like a boy?
As you can see here, the way that he was asking the question just came off, in my opinion at least, very derogatory and just kind of nasty. Like, you would think that if somebody's coming forward with a rape story and trying to share their story and report it to the police, that the police would be more understanding. But instead, it seems like he's trying to put the blame on Brandon and say, well, why were you going around with a sock in your pants trying to pretend you're a boy? Like, you're not a boy. Like, stop acting like you are. And it came across as very, at least in my opinion, transphobic. It came across as very offensive. And I'm sure Brandon was completely pissed off about this as well. He also would ask him questions like, why do you go around hanging out only with girls and not guys? And why do you think girls think you're a guy? Like, why do you try to trick people into thinking you're a guy? And Brandon was completely baffled by this. The police tried to blame this on saying the courts would ask these questions, but these questions were clearly not something that would probably come up in a court setting, and these were just things that he was asking God knows why. They were just completely inappropriate and not right for what a police officer should have been asking Brandon about the assault.
Why do you run around with girls instead of guys, being you a girl yourself? Why do you run around with girls instead of guys, being you're a girl yourself? Why do you make girls think you're a guy? You have the slightest idea. You go around kissing other girls? The girls that don't know about you think you're a guy. Do you kiss them?
What happened last night?
I hope you understand why I included those clips. I know you can't see the actual recording, but there actually wasn't much to see anyway. It was basically just like an audio recording just saying who was speaking and what they said, so I just did that part for you. But I really wanted to include this as I felt it was super important in understanding like how uncomfortable the sheriff was clearly making Brandon feel. I mean, you could tell at the very end of the clip that I just showed you, the one that you just watched, that he was like, why am I even being asked these questions? Like, they clearly have nothing to do. And the cop afterwards tried to clarify and say like, well, the courts are going to say X, Y, and Z. But it was clear that the sheriff had his own weird motives when it came to this, and he was just asking these questions because he had the power to, really. And so, you know, that was a huge issue. And I just wanted to show that because I think it's a really important part of this case as well, to see how the police handled the rape accusations before Brandon's death. So after Brandon had gone in and, you know, explained his story to the police and his sexual assault, they did make a file of it, and I believe they did do a rape kit. However, the rape kit ended up going missing somehow. I'm not sure how, but the rape kit was basically destroyed, but they did perform when I read. So a few days later, on December 28th, the police brought in Tom and John for questioning, as they needed to interview them about, you know, and hear what they had to say about the sexual assault. And so Tom did actually admit to beating and sexually assaulting Brandon, and John basically said that, like, this did happen as well. Like, they basically confirmed the story, and somehow the police let them both go. So they just admitted to raping Brandon, and the police were like, well, we're gonna let you go. Are you kidding? Are you kidding me? These men are known to both be very violent. You can just tell by the crime that they committed that there was so much hate within them. And so the police's response to that was, well, let's just let them go and see what happens. And obviously, I'm sure you can guess, things did not go super well for Brandon. After the assault and reports to the police, Brandon decided to leave town because he just didn't want to be around these people anymore and he needed a break. So he went to go stay with a friend named Lisa Lambert in Humboldt, Nebraska, and she had a child there with her. So we're going to skip about 3 days in advance. So Brandon had been staying there for about 3 days when on the morning of December 31st, Lisa's mom came to check up on her daughter because she hadn't seen her or heard from her in a while, and so she wanted to see if everything was okay. And so she went to the door and she knocked on the door. However, on her second knock, she said she could hear that the baby was crying inside, which she thought was super strange because her daughter would never, you know, let her baby cry and not be tending to it. So she thought that was a huge red flag immediately. And so eventually she decided, I need to get into this house. So she just ended up going inside of the house and stopped knocking. And when she went in, the first thing that she saw when she went in was the living room. And there was actually a African-American man, she said, passed out on the living room floor, like hunched over, and she didn't know if he was just asleep or something, but she said she was in denial and she didn't want to think this was anything serious, so she just said, you know what, like, it's nothing, I'm just gonna go try to find my daughter. And so she tried to look for her, and so she went up to her room where the baby was, and she said when she got into the room, she heard the baby was crying, so all of her focus was on the baby. She walked in, did not pay attention to the state of the room, and picked up the baby, and when she went to turn around, that's when she saw that her daughter was knocked out on the other side of her room. And so she saw that her daughter was most likely not alive because I'm assuming there's a lot of blood everywhere, because if you hear, when you'll hear what they did to her, you'll understand why she knew she was dead. And so she decided that she would be no help here and she couldn't help her daughter, so she decided that she had to go get help. So she did, I think, drive to the police station, get them, told them what happened, and they came back to the house to do a complete investigation. So when the police arrived, they actually had found 3 bodies in the house. They found the body of Brandon Teena, Philip Devine, and Lisa Lambert. And Philip Devine was a friend of both Lisa, I think, and Brandon, I think, but he basically had just come to visit because he had a fight with his girlfriend and he just wanted to get out of the house, and he happened to walk into this house at the wrong time. So the police, obviously after finding Brandon's body there, they kind of assumed that this was way too big of a coincidence, and so they thought that he probably had something to do with this case. And so they went over to Tom and John's house as they figured they were involved, and they investigated, and they basically like knew that they had done something. And so they arrested them later that day in connection with the murder. And so now they were both sent to court, and they were both charged with the triple homicide that had taken place at this house. So while in court, it was revealed what happened as both the men admitted to basically what happened. The state also ended up not having enough evidence to convict John, so they ended up giving Tom a plea deal to testify against John because they wanted to make sure that John ended up in jail just as much as Tom did, because they wanted to make sure one man didn't get off because there was just like less evidence on him. So now I'm going to go into what actually like they described happening and what the police believed to happen based off of their testimony. So after John and Tom broke into Lisa's house, they found Lisa immediately and questioned her on Brandon's whereabouts. That was who they were mainly after, because they had found out that Brandon was staying at a friend Lisa Lambert's house in Humboldt, Nebraska. Eventually they found Brandon hiding underneath the bed and they dragged him out. So now they had Lisa, Brandon, and Philip all subdued in the main room. The first person they decided to attack was Brandon. They actually pointed the gun right at his chin and shot him, and the reason they know it was so close is because the gunpowder had burned parts of his face. So that was like how close the gun was, because gunpowder comes off of the gun, so like it had to be like literally here. John Lauder then shot Lisa right in her stomach, where she screamed and held her stomach because she was just shot in the stomach, and he then shot her right in the eyeball. And they said that the gun was so close to her that there was gunpowder residue all over her face and that had burned her. Lastly, they then took Philip into the living room and they finished him there, and they also shot him in that room. After they had shot everyone, they decided to walk around the house to make sure there was no evidence left behind, and they saw that Brandon Teena was twitching. They didn't know if he was alive or dead. They just wanted to make sure that he stopped moving, and so they took a knife. Tom took Brandon's body and pushed him into the knife to make sure that he was completely finished off. So obviously there was enough evidence that the jury was able to convict them both of murder, and so John Lauder was sentenced to death for his part in the murder because I think he was the one who shot most of the people, and Tom, who was given a plea deal, was given life in prison for his part in the murder. So that is all I have on the actual crime that took place, so we can look a little bit into the aftermath. So in 1999, a film was released called Boys Don't Cry about Brandon's story. So this movie is actually really, really famous and is a cult classic among like LGBT groups, and it's really well received by a lot of people. It has an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I've actually never seen the movie, but I think you might want to watch it if you're interested, and it is actually like about this case. Again, the Matthew Shepard case, you know, kind of ties into this because I've been covering a lot of hate crimes recently. During the Matthew Shepard murder, right after his death, a lot of people had begun to re-protest and try to get, you know, justice for Brandon. One of the biggest issues with this crime is that they felt like the police did not do their job, and they discriminated against Brandon because of his transgender status, and they believed that had Brandon not been transgender, they would have arrested the men after they admitted to sexually assaulting Brandon the first time, and they wouldn't have waited, giving Tom and John time to murder Brandon after the report had been filed and they had been interviewed. This was just another case that shows how transgender people and gay people can be discriminated against by the police. And so, you know, this just again shows how people were discriminated against by law enforcement based on their gender and sexual identity. So yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed this case, or not really enjoyed it actually. I hope that you learned something from this case and that, you know, Brandon's death cannot be in vain, and so I hope we can grow as a society. I know this was almost 30 years ago now, but I still think this story is so important to hear. As I say in every single one of my cases, you know, even though these hate crimes were so long ago, there are still some people that are filled with that hate, and especially in today's climate, there are people who would be crazy enough to do this shit again. Like, straight up, like, there are people that have that much hate in their heart, and so I want to keep bringing up these cases that I feel like not enough people know about, because these people's stories deserve to be heard, you know what I mean? Like, Brandon could have had an amazing life with Lana, but instead that was completely taken away from him a few days after his 21st birthday. And it's just like, so awful to think about. So yeah, guys, I want to say something positive, but you know, this case really, really upset me, and it was definitely one of the darker cases I filmed ever, I would say, and it really hit me hard. So yeah, I don't think my next video is going to be as dark. I'm going to try to make like a little commentary-esque video in between my next video and this, because it was super upsetting to film this one. I don't really know why, but it was. But I love you guys so much. Thank you for always supporting my content and enjoying what I put out. I love you guys so, 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 so much. Let's keep writing in our prayers, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.